First thing I'll say is this was technically, but also technically not a viewer requested game by Arrow. But thank you for the recommendation regardless. Um, I also don't have a ton of thoughts written down on this game. Um, Not as much as I would normally like to, but there's a reason for that. So my first impressions. There's been some nice improvements for the game. Combat feels really nice, which includes ES mech battles, and the UI actually makes a bunch of sense. Really glad they brought back skills, although I'm undecided if I like how boosting works now. Removing the turn carousel was definitely unexpected. It was unique, and while I prefer it gone, I kind of miss it, question mark. Time skipping approximately 6 months after the events of Xenosaga 2, while important character centric events happened, is definitely a choice I don't agree with. Shion's entire story off screen sounds incredibly interesting and feels like a missed opportunity. That could have been the prologue. For the final game in the trilogy, it definitely feels like things are moving very slowly and not directly towards the conclusions that need to happen. There's a lot of plot threads that need closing, and the first 8 hours aren't giving me a lot of confidence that I'll get closure. All right, those are my first impressions. And my overall thoughts is I didn't like this game at all. Like, not at all. The sins of the past are something that, well, let me clarify. Not there are some things that I liked about this game, but the thing is if you're gonna write a trilogy, and you expect it to end on the trilogy, then I expect you to have a plan that you have the start, the middle, and the end all mapped out, and things are going to flow and weave as they should. And for the Xenosaga franchise, I feel like that does not exist. Um, there does not seem to be a plan that weaves each game into the next and moves each plot thread as they should into the next games so that they reach their conclusions and things like that. So I'm kind of in a situation where I feel like this game has given me two different experiences. We have a trilogy closer, and then we have a Xenosaga game. Um, I wanted a trilogy closer, and while that was given here, I don't think it was the right approach to it because a lot of things were saved for this game, and something that I'll talk about in a little bit as well is that um, some of the time allocation in this game is is not spent correctly. Let's see. Feels like a second game in the trilogy in many ways. This is something that um, I heavily feel. Um, if you can recall back, the box for Xenosaga 2 said that you need to understand the past in order to understand the future. And I was very confused why they went with that kind of language because there was very little in the past to understand. But this game does a time travel genjutsu portion that feels very much tied to that particular tagline. So it feels awkward to experience that when like that could have just been in the second game and it would have made way more sense if it was in the second game. And if you like this game a lot, here's your warning because the rest of this is going to be almost exclusively negative, except for the combat, and that's positive. So, there you go. I have very little positive things to say about this game. Um, and when I say like the sins of the past too, it's one of those things where I I get to have one of those unique positions where I got to play a trilogy in a relatively short amount of time. And so I get to judge each game based off of what that game is doing, but also how it's building upon the prior games. And so that means that Xenosaga 3 has a lot to do and a lot to live up to and a lot of expectations for it. So, story was it satisfying? I'm going to say no on this one. I I I will say that they provided they wrapped more things up than I thought they would, and some of those wrapping ups were were more interesting than I thought uh, they were going to be in terms of direction. But I felt like a lot of the things were lacking. Did it feel complete? Um, I'm going to hesitantly say yes on this one. I feel like they brought a narrative to close. It's not necessarily the problem I have with it is I think the narrative that they closed off is not necessarily the narrative that I thought Xenosaga was or should have been. So it's kind of weird, but I will say yes. Question mark. How was the pacing? Pacing was absolutely terrible in this game. Thoughts on the story? I admittedly checked out of the story in the game in general when they said they were transported 15 years in the past. At that moment, it made me realize that the game was not going to end in the fashion I felt was suitable, and was not going to give me closure, and justified my fears that the series would be overly ambitious. Uh, Xenosaga 1 was a game setting up a lot of mysteries. It creates a bunch of characters, organizations, superpowers, monsters, and narrative points. Uh, what it does, what it does, what it does though, is set up what we can assume to be the main villain, Udu. It didn't do the greatest of jobs, but it set the stage for plot threads to continue. Don't tell what it is. I know what you're talking about. Xenosaga 2 first focuses on Momo and the Y data, which Albedo is trying to get so that he can do Udu things. Then it focuses on Junior and his confrontation with Albedo, his mission as a URTV and such. This entry did very little to move the grand plot forward and basically served as a spot to kill Albedo. We get introduced to new organizations, new characters, etc., that convolute things because very few threads get to move forward. Oh, don't tell that is it. As far as I know, it's this is the end. I mean, we got credits. We'll find out after I'm done, and we continue the save or something like that. Xenosaga 3 forces us to believe that Vector is evil from jump, which wasn't the impression I got from them in any of the other games, and then just has us running around. We have to rescue the Elsa for a bunch of hours. We enter a Genjutsu of 15 years ago where Shion does some of the most bonkers things, and then we chase after Dimitri and the Zohar to end it all. My problem with all of this is that these three games do not present a trilogy to me, at least not in the way that I believe one should go. Xenosaga 1 set the stage, so Xenosaga 2 should set us up for the finale. The problem is that it didn't do that. It hyper focused on certain things and then left everything else for Xenosaga 3. And Xenosaga 3 wastes your time for the first 20 hours or so, and then starts to progress the main plot forward with plot dumps, but as quickly as it can, but also as slowly as it can with lengthy dungeons and enemy encounters. So that's more or less, more mostly, the crux of the problem I have with this game is that to me, if I wanted to create a trilogy for something, I might approach things in a similar way. I have the first game to set up a lot of the things, give some backstory and some world building and stuff like that, set up my villains and set up the organizations and things like that that I want to progress forward. And then the second game, I want to maybe turn things on their head a little bit. Um, Maybe I'll introduce a a new villain that's kind of interfering with my villain or something like that. Um, I'll introduce a couple more characters, but we're still going along the same plot. And in the third game is going to be like the last hurrah. And so everything that we're doing is moving the plot towards the the grand finale. And we're while we're doing that, we're learning all kinds of things that we haven't learned already, and that knowledge is progressing us towards that grand finale where we have the big awesome boss fight and stuff like that. But before we get to the big awesome boss fight, we should have all the knowledge of what we're doing, why we're doing it, whose motivations are what, yada yada, this and that. And I don't think these games do that. There's like everything is just all over the place. And I cannot understand for the life of me why we had the 15 years ago Genjutsu mind control thing in this game. It was such a waste of time. And the only thing that we got out of it was Shion summoned the Gnosis, which they never explain why that is, or how she got those powers, or um, uh, why that's important. We don't even know what the Gnosis are in relation to Shion. I feel like none of that is explained whatsoever. And we also get the information that um, that she and Cosmos are linked together. Um, and like those were the two vital informations that we got. But not really, it was in her mind. You know, that could have been just part of a lie in the thing. That's largely the problem with that is none of it none of it was real, and some of the stuff that may have been real may not have been real. Who knows? But they wasted so much time with that, and as soon as they said that it was 15 years ago, I was like, nope, you immediately lost me. And yeah, that's I mean, I wasn't necessarily as on board before then either. Um, the Elsa gets lost at Rennes le Chateau, and like we risk like everything to go rescue them. I know they're the homies and stuff like that, but sometimes there's nothing you can do. And that was one of those scenarios where it's like, Yo, there's nothing we can do about this. If the plan all along was for Telos and Cosmos to brawl it out in a struggle to recreate Mary, then the trilogy should have revolved around that. The second game shouldn't have spent so much time on Albedo and Udu, and instead focused on the Genjutsu portion. I think that would have flowed better. It also would have been nice because we would have understood the motivations of Testament, which, by the way, we know nothing about Testament at all. I don't even know who Wilhelm is, by the way. He said he was the operator, which does not help anything. Um, yeah. Uh, and yeah, we just move on. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on my thoughts for this game. Wasn't the whole anima thing exclusive to UTIC? How did everyone else get it? I would really like to know this. In I think it was Xenosaga 2. They were they were talking about the vessels of anima, stuff like that. But when we go into this game, like we just have mechs with vessels of anima in them, and I have no idea how we got them, why we have them. You know, they just show up, and we're just expected to go along with it. Uh, I have here, extremely concerned about how the plot is progressing so far because there doesn't seem to be a lot of traction. And then I go through and then I list out everything that's happening and why it's confusing. And I'm not going to reread that. Um, but you know what? You know what I can do? You know what I can do? I could throw it on screen real quick and you can read it. Let's try that again, shall we? Click the wrong one. You can pause it and you can read all this that I wrote down. Isn't it great? It's great. I lost the emulator, but you know what? It's whatever. It's whatever. Oh, there we go. Let's skip. Oh, there was more to that, but you know whatever. Let's skip to. I think I'm ready to say that the entire going back in time, 15 years plotline was not a valuable investment of time for the final game of this trilogy. I agree with that. Not a whole lot of Telos in this. This was very surprising to me. Um, and this happens in some of the other Xenosaga games too, where they introduce a villain or something like that, a character that seems to be integral to the plot, and then they don't do anything with that character. And Telos was introduced at the testing grounds, and then we fight Telos in Mary's grave, which was back in time, I think. And then there might have been one other time where we fought Mary. And then there was a sequence at the end with, or not Mary, Telos. And then there was a sequence at the end with Telos and Cosmos and the convergence of Mary. Um, and I don't know. I feel like, I feel like Telos deserved a lot more screen time than what she got. Albedo got so much more screen time. Very confusing. The exposition in this game is out of control. Oh, it is crazy. I think this game might be, if I were to be facetious and maybe um, over exaggerate quite a bit, I would say like 80% of the dialogue in this game is exposition. It's crazy. Did we get closure for the following? UTIC. I don't feel like we got really any closure for UTIC. Um, we know that they're an organization that one of the scientist guys. It's not Dimitri. It's the other guy, Momo's father or whatever. Um, I I mean I guess we got closure for that in the sense of it's not Utic, it's Ormus, but they're also kind of the same. Yeah, I don't know. Udu. I don't feel like there was any closure on Udu. They set up Udu to be like this god, but Shion was supposedly in contact with Udu. So I feel in for me, I feel like this game was about Udu. And so when we don't fight Udu, when we don't interact with Udu, we don't do nothing in regards to Udu, it's confusing to me because we spend a lot of time on Udu related stuff. Xenosaga 1 was um like kind of an introduction of Udu is going to be your main antagonist. And Xenosaga 2 was, hey, Albedo is going to summon Udu. You better stop him. And then Xenosaga 3 was, oh, we want to resurrect uh, some chick so that we can reset the world over and over again so that Udu can't interfere anymore or something like that. It's like it's such a weird transition, I guess. Albedo. I don't think we really got a whole lot of closure on Albedo, despite spending so much time on Albedo. Um, you know, him becoming a testament was really confusing and not explained as far as I'm aware. Um, him saving the party from Dimitri seemed very confusing to me. Um, a lot of things around Albedo just felt confusing. The United Federation, I don't even know who's in the United Federation anymore. So I'm just going to say no on that one. But we might have gotten closure on that. They're probably all dead. Kukai Foundation, I feel like not any any amount of time was spent on the Kukai Foundation at all in this game, despite them being so important in the first game. As a matter of fact, I don't think they spent any amount of politics in this game at all, off the top of my head, um, which is actually a really strange thing to spend the entirety of the first game on politics, and then the second game is kind of like it still has those political elements in it, but it's not as forefront, I suppose. And then the final game just has no mention of it whatsoever. That's very interesting, and I didn't think about that at all. Do we have closure for Vector? Um, no, I don't think so. I have a Wilhelm here in parentheses. I I'm still confused about Wilhelm. Um, who is he? I know why he's doing the things that he's doing, but how does he have all these powers? It seems like he creates testaments. How does he do that? Why does he need the testaments? Uh, there's so many questions about Wilhelm, and I don't have very many answers to them. The Gnosis. I They said at the end that the Gnosis are like the will of people, which you know what? It's nonsense to me, but I'll accept it. What I don't understand is how to if we are to believe that Shion summoned the Gnosis, why are Gnosis these like crazy creatures from another dimension? The will of dead people, and then they're going about killing people and stuff like that. The I I I feel like they created the Gnosis just to be this mysterious um, enemy entity and provide no explanation as to why they're important or what they're doing or all that other stuff. Cosmos. I feel like I feel like we probably got closure on Cosmos. Um, the first game, I got the impression that these three games were going to be about Cosmos, and then the second game happened, and it was not about Cosmos at all. I think Cosmos was in like two cutscenes or something like that, and then in this game, they put basically all the focus on Cosmos. Um, so I I think we have enough closure on Cosmos. Um, and I will probably say that Shion has we have closure for Shion as well. Um, I don't I will say that the Shion from game 1 and 2 are not the same Shion as game 3. Shion in game 2 was losing her mind, doing things to like she believed that she was transported 15 years in the past, but she was very determined to screw up the timeline, even though it didn't make any sense for her to do that. Um, and in this game, she just, it felt like she was just making things up all the time. Like her being alone, I don't really get that. I haven't gotten that impression from her ever until she just said it randomly. Abel. Who's who's Abel? Why has he been around for hundreds of years? And why does he still look like a child? Why was he doing the things at the end? You know, Zohar. I I don't think they've explained a single thing about the Zohar. Um, what it is, what it's supposed to do. Why did people uh want to go after the Zohar? Like when studies were done on the Zohar, what were the capabilities that people were finding from that stuff? The the Zohar was just kind of like a MacGuffin in this game, I guess, for villains to just kind of do whatever they wanted, and it felt weird. Chaos. I feel like we got a plot dump at the end to explain chaos, which I'm gonna let it rock, but I don't think it's good enough for me. Nephilim. I still don't know who Nephilim is. Uh, n- Not at all. I'm unbelievably confused who Nephilim is, why Nephilim is like a ghost, um, everything. For Brony and her sisters, uh, I know we've got some scenes. I think it was Xenosaga 1 regarding Fabronia, but they brought Fabronia back in this game for the Genjutsu, and I'm just a little confused, I guess. But you know, whatever. Testaments. I mentioned earlier that it seems like Wilhelm knows how to create testaments. I don't know why. the testaments are who they are and why they're like important for what they're important for. There was Voyager, who I every single testament was somehow um I'm going to say related, but that's not the word I want to go with. But they were related to somebody in the party. It was Voyager, who killed Ziggy's family. There was Albedo, who's Albedo, and is related to Junior. There's Kevin, who's related to Shion. And then there's uh gosh, what was his name? Virgil? Virgil, I think his name was, who was also related to Shion. And it, how do they have their powers? Why were they doing the things that they were doing? How were they doing the things they were doing? How do you throw everybody into a Genjutsu mine prison of 15 years ago? You know, all that stuff. Heinlein, we got closure on Heinlein, and I actually like how they did the Heinlein thing. I think they could have done it better, but it was it was nice to see an organization do things because like that's how they've always done them in a sense, and then have that organization kind of turn on its head and be like, hey, actually the things that you believe in are just totally made up, and you're just doing what I wanted you to do this entire time. I liked those interactions. um that being said, I don't like what they did to Margulis and um uh whatever her name was. I thought I wrote it down. Uh I wrote it down somewhere, but yeah, Margulis and whatever her name was. I'm not a fan of how they did those characters. Margulis seemed like he was a pretty intelligent guy. Um and to just have him go to the route of I I cannot achieve any more satisfaction in life, so I'm going to duel you. The one person who I feel is the most duelable, and I want to fight you to the death. I I I feel like if you have a crisis of faith, it would have been far more interesting for Margulis to actually team up with us and be like, "Yo, I my whole world is upside down right now, but I know one thing. I need to get revenge on Wilhelm." I would have rocked with that. Telos, I Telos was exited stage left as quickly as she entered stage right. I I guess we got closure on her. Alan, Alan stepped up at the end there. I think it was completely out of character. But you know what? I'll give it to you, Alan. Kanan to me was probably a worthless inclusion. Um, he was there to spy on people, but he didn't like. There was no need for a character like Kanan to exist because Cosmos exists. Cosmos is literally a robot designed by Kevin. It could spy on people already. So Kanan was already really worthless in the second game, and he just became more worthless in this game. And they tried to give him a purpose, and it just didn't work. The last one I have is Ormus. I feel like we got closure on Ormus. Um, but there wasn't a whole lot there. They could have given us more about Ormus. I think actually they could have spent a whole game on Ormus, but they didn't do that. We're getting there. We're getting there. I need to go faster. For gameplay mechanics and design, with gameplay elements stand out. Definitely much more improved than the prior game. The UI is much cleaner, navigation is nicer, and they brought back skill trees. Then again, the skill trees weren't all too exciting, and some characters like Junior felt extremely out of place with their trees, but I'm happy they're back. Yeah, this is all I have written down for gameplay mechanics or the gameplay elements here, but I like the improvements that they did over Xenosaga 2. Now, granted, Xenosaga 2 was a um, like a complete redo of the whole thing, and it just didn't work as well as it could have. I think they went in the wrong direction. So really, the comparison here is how does Xenosaga 3's elements line up with Xenosaga 1's? And I I like the approach of Xenosaga 3 a lot more than Xenosaga 1. Xenosaga 1's skill trees, um, they weren't as nice. Um, the navigation of them wasn't very nice. Knowing what abilities do wasn't very nice. But they had elements of them that were really nice, such as like giving your skills to other characters and stuff like that. That was really, really cool. And maybe that was one of the reasons why Xenosaga 2 went the way they did. 'Cause it's like if if you can just transfer skills to whoever you want, air quotes, whenever you want, um, then why not just give everybody the same skills and you can just choose what you want for them? I can actually see some amount of rationalization there. I don't agree with it, but I can see how those conversations could have potentially happened. Um, for combat, I like the combat, but I feel like boosting is less valuable now that the carousel from the first two games is gone. It feels more valuable for me to save my boost for finishing strikes rather than literally any other action. So yeah, I like the combat. I like that they added buffs that affect the entirety of your party or the entirety of the enemies. I like that they added so many different types of spells and interactions with spells. They have AoE spells. Um, I like that characters have some like I'm not gonna I want to say unique aspects to them, but maybe it's more maybe it's better just to say that they have some archetypes that are also included with their kit, such as like Jin getting the double chance and Ziggy getting the double chance, um, uh, and like the revenge chance, and like all that stuff. That stuff is super cool. That they have like passives and tech attacks, and then they have ether attacks. Like I like how they approach those things and how they integrated them into the fights. Um, I I like how they had a weakness system and they even played around with the weakness system. Some enemies changed it mid fight. So like there were things to force you to change your strategy and evaluate things differently. So I think the combat in this game is very successful. The only thing, the only downside that I have for it is that I want to say I boosted to get an extra turn probably less than 5 times for however many hundreds of encounters that I did. Um, there's It just didn't feel like there was a lot of incentive to boost that way because the rewards for finishing strikes were more valuable than that. I can I can take more damage so that I can get more experience and more skill points. Um, I yeah, I don't know. I don't know. The ES mech battles I surprisingly like. Um, the ES battles I surprisingly like. This is definitely the best iteration of these battles, and they are cool. I didn't really like the inclusion of AGWSs in the first game. They kind of felt awkward, and it seemed like they made things worse for me. In the second game, I wasn't the biggest of fans, I don't think. Um, but in this game, they did some cool stuff. Like if you were to make Armored Core into a if you were to take the Armored Core experience of gameplay, like combat and stuff like that, and put it into a turn-based game, that's the kind of impression that I got. It's like you have certain attacks and you have certain energy reserves, and like when you execute those attacks, the characters are moving about in the space that they have and shooting those attacks and stuff like that, and you have like hit counts, and um, there was a lot of really cool ideas, and I think they executed those ideas pretty well, uh, especially considering the previous two games were kind of misses in my eyes. So um, really, really cool. For dungeons, I felt like so many of them were affected by practical dungeon design, and a lot of them were annoying, mostly because um, I don't know if I necessarily call it a difficulty spike, but the HP values of enemies just started getting out of control. If I'm fighting three enemies in a random encounter and they all have 8,000 HP, and I'm doing 500, 600 damage per attack, these battles are going to take way too long to do. For cardinal sins, removing a key party member without sufficient replacement, forcing the player to use certain party members, and backup party earns less experience and skill points. Miscellaneous sound and music. I don't recall. I don't recall much music from this game. That's mostly because the music was very much in the background. Didn't feel like it was in the forefront very often. Pretty sure there was a dungeon or two that didn't have music at all, or at least had segments in those dungeons that did not have music that kind of stood out as being kind of weird. Um, but of the music that I did hear, it seemed okay. I didn't hear anything that I would want to make a beat with, but I'll listen to the soundtrack and figure that out. I'll actually get to hear all the tracks. For voice acting, I think the voice acting is a little rough around the edges. It's serviceable, um, but there's definitely some misses in there. For graphics, I think the graphics were pretty good. They changed the character models again, which I'm not a fan of, but you know, you guys do you, I guess. For other, if it's a sequel, does it achieve more of the same? This one's kind of weird because Xenosaga 2 is such an anomaly in the for the other two games, but I would say this is more of the same, um, largely speaking. Is the game worth recommending? Absolutely not. I think I said in Xenosaga 1 that at from that point on, I found it difficult to find some way to recommend the series. And now having played the series, none of them are worth recommending to somebody. I cannot see myself saying, you know what would be a good collection of games for you to play is a game that sets up a bunch of plot threads but doesn't give you any resolution or satisfaction there. It's a cliffhanger on literally everything. And then the next game, you hyper focus on two characters that, let's be honest, are not even important. Them being Momo and Junior, because the third game uh, doesn't even need them. So you know, you're, uh, so yeah, I can't recommend them. If the developer is watching, I had concerns that the series would have similar issues to a prior game, which was scope issues. To me, it feels like this series was very unfocused. Every game was completely different from the previous, focused on different things, and are all extremely ambitious. Yeah. You guys made another game before these ones, and I thought that one was very ambitious, and it ran into some troubles. And I feel like this one, uh, I feel like this one, from the outside looking in, it looks like this series was given a chance for the plan to be put into full motion to some degree, um, and it just still didn't work out. And that to me is concerning. Um, it feels to me like there wasn't a three game plan, but instead a let's make the game one game, or let's make the game one game at a time because of uncertainty on the next game being created. I just can't fathom how we have things happening off screen and time jumps happening between games. So something actually I didn't mention was Scientia, getting closure on them. Um, there must have been something out there that revolved around Shion meeting Scientia and doing all those things. Because there's no way that they introduce that organization and Shion being thinking that Vector is evil off of like these little excerpts in in the menu, and then they just base the entirety of Xenosaga 3 off those excerpts and start from there. Like that's crazy. That's just crazy. Um uh yeah. So I'm gonna keep it a buck. All right. It's just it doesn't work out. Um I fully understand that writing a trilogy like this is it's crazy difficult. Um, but reining things in and keeping the scope small seems like the best way to go about it. And having a strong outline seems like a necessity, and like you got to stick to that outline. And then if you need to bulk things up after that, then you can bulk things up after that. Do I want a sequel? Absolutely not. And that's my thoughts on Xenosaga 3. To reiterate them, my overall thoughts, I didn't like this game very much. Um, at least in terms of story and how the trilogy of itself goes. I don't feel like the trilogy is worth playing. I don't feel like e- I don't feel like any of the games are um, I'm going to say standalone, but I don't mean standalone in the sense of like you can play two and understand things, but in the sense of like they don't do what they should be doing if you remove uh if you remove any of the games uh from the thing, like if if you have one, that game does what it needs to do, and then you have two, but if if the first game didn't exist and you played two, I don't think it would matter as much. And if you played Xenosaga 3 and the prior two games didn't exist, like you're still just going to be just as confused. And I don't think that should happen in a trilogy. I will say that they did not do like recaps and all that other stuff as far as I can remember in any of the games, which I appreciate. Um, Games out there, just assume that everybody playing the second game knows what's going on, and don't spend however many hours or character lines recapping things. But that's just my opinion. Anyways, that's all my thoughts. I need to get out of here. It's hot and hungry, tired. Um, doesn't look like there's any points, so I'm going to end my thoughts here. Yeah, yeah. We done? What happens if I continue? Unlock swimsuit mode. Unlocked Alan's swimsuit. Press the square button when selecting the scene to switch to swimsuit mode. This mode will replay the events with the characters wearing their swimsuits. Only applies to characters with swimsuits unlocked. How ridiculous. Relations is flawless. Special character armor that changes the character model. That's for chaos. Check that out real quick. Ah, that one. Okay, well, that's that. I'm out. Peace.